Hello everyone, this is Amit here. I'm your mentor for this course. Today, in this particular video, we are going to discuss about salient features of Indian society. This is the first topic of the syllabus, as I have already told you in the previous video. Salient features. Well, the syllabus talks about this topic. UPSC is given syllabus that also talks about salient features of Indian society. What do we mean by the word salient? What are salient features? Commonly, I would be critical of a few particular materials and all, even online and offline as well. Number of people, they tell us that by salient features we mean the unique features of any particular thing. No. Look at the dictionary. Salient feature means defining features or those features which shape you. They can be unique, they may not be unique, doesn't matter. But defining features. Let's see what are these features which define Indian society, which shape Indian society. Well, there are not one but 8 such features. I'm going to take up those features one by one. Okay. The first feature, that is caste system. We all have heard of this. This is not something new or unique to us. At least I'm quite sure none of you are listening this particular term for the first time. However, I must admit that not only this is the most famous feature of Indian society, it is also very unique to Indian society. Okay? Yes, the British colonial masters and following them, number of Indologists, they have tried to draw parallel between the caste system in India and a Portuguese system called casta. Okay. But the Portuguese system of casta is not equivalent to the caste system of India. Caste system or Varna system is far more socio-religious in nature. Whereas casta, the system of the Portuguese, is completely based on estate or property, real estate. Okay. So Varna system in that sense is grossly different from casta that is practiced by the Portuguese. Okay, fine. From where do we have this system? What is the basis of this? I'm saying this is a socio-religious system. It's Rig Veda, Dasam Mandala, Purush Sukta. This is the particular segment which talks about Varna system for the first time. In this 10th Mandal, this section called Purush Sukta for the first time mentions Varna system as such, or rather categorizes them, puts it into one perspective. What does it say? I'm saying this in Hindi, this particular segment. ब्रह्म के मुखविवर से पैदा हुए ब्राह्मण, भुजाओं से क्षत्रिय, जंघा से वैश्य, पद से शूद्र. Meaning, from the face of the Almighty, the Padam Brahm, comes the Brahmins. From his arms comes the Kshatriyas. From his thighs came the Vaishyas, and from his feet came the Shudras. 4 separate Varnas: Brahmin, the priestly class; Kshatriyas, the warrior class; Vaishyas, the agriculturists or traders; and Shudras, the service providers. Okay. However, subsequently we would also be seeing that a 5th category or a 5th segment would come up by the term Ati Shudra or untouchables. They would be even lower than the Shudras. Okay. And in the name of this categorization, for millennia, tremendous amount of oppression would be carried on by the society, especially on that section called Ati Shudra or untouchables, inhuman behavior and God knows what not. Okay, so that's caste system. I'm not getting in depth in caste system because that's not the perspective of this topic. Here we are just looking at the features of Indian society. However, though finally we saw a very bad face of caste system, But originally, this idea, this caste system, this idea was conceived in a different perspective altogether. What was that perspective? The perspective was to categorize people based on division of labor, the kind of job that they do. Say, the warrior clan, Rajan initially, they were the protectors of the society. Then the Purohits, subsequently they would be renamed as Brahmins. They were the ones who were the keepers of the scriptures, and they were also the people who were knowledgeable, who helped in governing. And then the common people, Vaishyas. Okay. Subsequently, this method of classification of people based on division of labor would become hereditary, and we would see the final phase of it, the oppressive phase of this particular system. Okay, so that's caste system. Next one, patriarchy. This is perhaps one universal feature of Indian society. From north to south, from easternmost corner to the west, you show me one segment which is not patriarchal in nature. Okay. I know the moment I made this statement, number of you frowned. Why? We have heard that Nayars in Kerala, they are matriarchal. Then there are some tribes in northeast. Most of us don't know who they are, whom are we talking about. But some tribes in northeast who are matriarchal. The term matriarchal. Wrong. What you know is absolutely wrong. This term, archi, is associated with authority in society. This has never been given to women. You cannot show me one single corner of earth where authority as such has been shared with women by the society. Leave aside India. That's why so confidently I could say that India is universally patriarchal. The sections you're talking about, Nayars of Kerala, Khasis and Garos of Meghalaya. Yes, those northeastern tribes you have heard of, they're Khasis and Garos. Okay. So, Nayars of Kerala, Khasis and Garos of Meghalaya, they are not matriarchal, they are matrilineal. The term is lineage. They draw their surname from their mother, and the property is transferred from the mother to the daughter. But authority or control in the society, only with the men. In case of Nayars of Kerala, the family system of the Nayars is known as Taravad. Okay, where the property is transferred from mother to the daughter. But who takes care of the property? The brother. Okay, when the property is received from mother to the sister, the brother becomes the manager of the property. Mama, mother's brother, who was till now the head of the family, would now train the sister's son as or to be the manager and to become the head of the family subsequently. Authority again with men. In fact, this particular position, the paternal head, the so-called patriarchal head of the family, the mama, is known as Karnavan. Okay, so even among the Nayars of Kerala, it is a man who ultimately holds the authority. Among the Khasis and Garos, the husband, the groom, after marriage goes to the house of the bride. Okay, and he then inherits the authority to be the manager and to yield the authority of the property. He gets that from the father-in-law. again a father figure, again patriarchy. So authority transfers across the paternal line only. Okay, only men in the society who gains authority, not women. Property may transfer from one woman to another, not authority. That's why I can so easily say that yes, India is universally patriarchal. Okay, next particular feature, that is, right, family as the basis of the society. I'm getting into that. Well, 2-3 things I'll be talking about here. Number one, look at the scriptures of India, especially the mythologies. We have two mythologies which are compared with the other major mythologies of the world, Ramayana and Mahabharata. I'm saying look at those mythologies. First of all, the particular concept I'm discussing here, family as the basis of the society. I wish to be forgiven for my handwriting. I wish you're understanding what I'm writing. Chalo. So family as the basis of the society. Okay. Look at Ramayana and Mahabharata. What are they originally? Ramayana is a story of Surya Vansh or Raghu Vansh, arguably. And Mahabharata, the story of Chandra Vansh or Kauravas and Pandavas, Kuru Vansh and Pandavas. Right? So, both the mythologies are actually stories of the families. Clear? In Mahabharata only. I don't know whether you have gone through Mahabharata or not, but after Yatugriha Parv in Mahabharata, there is a period when the Pandavas, they were hiding. They went into hiding and they went to a particular city called Ek Chakra. Okay, in this Ek Chakra city or this Ek Chakra Nagari, they were hiding in the house of a particular Brahmin. I'm talking about the story of Vakasur Vadh. Okay, on one particular day, they heard Bhim and Kunti, they were staying back in the family, in the household. They heard that the landlord, the Brahmin, he and whole his family, they were crying. Why were they crying? Because this particular city, Ek Chakra Nagari, is protected by a Rakshasa, Vakasur. He protects the city, but in turn, the city, the people of the city, they are bound to feed this particular Rakshasa. Others, they have money, so what they do, they buy whatever is to be fed to the Rakshasa. But this Brahmin family, they are poor, they don't have money. So what they planned? They planned that one of them should be sent to the Rakshasa to be eaten. Okay. At first, they decided to send the daughter, and subsequently, the whole family they would decide to go. Again, a principle was focused here that to save a city, a family can be sacrificed, not an issue. Forget about even this one. I'm going forward and looking at the administrative structure of ancient India. The largest possible administrative structure was known as Mahajanapada. Okay. Below Mahajanapada, it was Janpad. And subsequently, if I carry forward, the smallest possible administrative unit for the purpose of tenancy, rent collection, would be Kul. Kul headed by Kulapati, family. So, even in administrative terms, family was the basis of Indian society. Okay, family headed by the family head. Fine. So that's what the significance of family has always been in Indian society. Now forget of all these things. Look at ourselves. Whatever you're doing is only because of your family. It's your family who supported you. It's your family who brought you to this level. Clear? So that's the significance of family in Indian society. Family as the basis. Next one, the fourth one, that is dichotomy between tradition and modernity. See, why just Indian society? Any society for that matter, there is only one constant in that society, that's change. Every society is continuously changing. Okay. Uh, in fact, if I look at Indian society, especially post 1991, I would be seeing that the society started changing very drastically. Why? Given the experience of the economic crisis and subsequently what we call as LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Given that the society started changing far more faster with the tendencies of globalization. Clear? So, in that backdrop, if I look at, what I see is that yes, Indian society is changing very fast and a kind of homogenization is happening. Okay. Today, just look at us ourselves or look at the surroundings. What is a common dressing style? We wear the men and the boys, we wear shirt, pant, predominantly jeans, right? The girls, they either wear salwar suit or something of that sort, even jeans and others. In a sense, we are moving away from our traditional dressing style. There's a kind of homogenization that's happening. Somehow we are losing our previous culture and we are moving towards a new culture, new kind of culture with the help of globalization. We are embracing that new culture, right? Obviously, you can see the rise of constitutionalism, people knowing of their rights, people becoming more and more aware of their political rights. Clear? But if that is happening on one hand, and yes, in terms of food habit and everything, this tendency can be seen. Changes are happening. See the way KFCs, Pizza Huts, Domino's, all these kind of food chains, they're opening up in the cities, right? And with that, obviously, people are moving towards a new kind of culture. We are becoming modern in a sense. Whether it's modernity or westernization, I'm not getting to that debate, but seemingly we are becoming modern. Chalo. But on the other hand, are we completely losing our traditions? By becoming modern, have you completely forgotten to wear a dhoti or a sari or something of that sort? For the girls, I'm saying, have you completely forgotten wearing sari? No. Even salwar suit, for that matter, is not a Western dress. It's an Indian dress only. Clear? So, somehow, even now, we are clinging to the traditions. Say, for example, in spite of rise of constitutionalism, rise of all these knowledge about the rights and everything, still khap panchayat that exists at certain corners of the country. Similarly, though we are learning to enjoy these pizzas, the burgers and everything, but still somehow we also relish our traditional food as well. So yes, India is a typical dichotomy. It's a society full of dichotomy, where both tradition and modernity survive together, hand in hand. Okay? So that's the next point. That's the fourth point. I'm going for the fifth point now. The fifth point is mutual respect and tolerance. Okay. India, it's a society of, what to say? Just look at in and around us. Look at the number of religions which you can see in and around us. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, Parsi religion. So many religions are there in and around us. Now these religions, these 7 religions which I discussed about, they are still mentioned as or recognized as the majority and the minority religions in India. Even those religions which are not recognized, say for example, Jewish religion. What about that? Even they have equal space in Indian society. Why so? And why just religion? Religion is just an example that I'm taking here. Okay? Anyone coming from outside, they have predominantly they have embraced Indian culture. They have embraced the Indian way of life. Other than the Europeans, look at whomsoever who came to India. Whether Shakas, Hunas, Pathans, doesn't matter. They came to India and they became Indians. They remained here. They belonged here. Kushanas, for that matter, who were they? Uchis, right? And after coming to India, they adopted Indian way of life. Clear? So this way, time and again we have seen people becoming predominantly Indian. Why this kept on happening? This particular aspect, mutual respect and tolerance. There is an essential feature which is a part of the Indian social system. A particular shloka I'm looking at, this particular shloka is not mentioned in any of the Puranas. No, please don't attribute it to any Purana. We have a very bad habit. We normally, wherever we come across any particular thing, we attribute it to different Puranas. This is not mentioned in any Purana. The shloka says, Sarva Dharma Samo Bhava. I'm quite sure you have heard of this particular shloka. Okay. What does this shloka mean? The common idea is that every religion is equal. No, that's not the original meaning of this shloka. Okay. Dharma means path, not religion. When someone says, it is my dharma to help others, that person is saying it's not my religion, it's my way of life. That's the way of life I have chosen. So, dharma predominantly means way of life. Okay? So, all the ways of life that lead to the same end, that's the meaning of this shloka. Now, whether the colloquial meaning or the actual meaning doesn't matter. The essence is just the same. And that has been dictating the way of life in India. Sarva Dharma Samo Bhava. And as a result, people, they have learned to respect each other. And that's how they have been carrying forward. Okay? Yes, as a result of this, we have seen that whomsoever who came to India, they were given equal space, they were given equal respect, and as a result, this holistic Indian society could grow. This is one of the most essential elements of Indian society, mutual respect and tolerance for each other. Okay, the next one, number 6, dichotomy between inclusion and exclusion. Yes, that too is there. We, on one hand, we are extremely inclusionary. How? Whomsoever came to India, just imagine, Kushanas came to India, we embraced them. Shakas came to India, we embraced them. Hunas or Hans came to India, we embraced them. The Mongols came to India, we embraced them. The Pathans came to India, we embraced them. Whomsoever came to India, we embraced them and we made them a part of Indian society. It has been a very strong and predominant culture. And that's how it has kept on growing. We have been including everyone. It's very inclusionary. On the other hand, look at the treatment we have been meeting the women in Indian society and the untouchables. How we have been treating them. Women, whichever religion, whichever section of the society they may belong to, they have always been excluded from the power structure. They have been always excluded from education and all these aspects. Similarly, untouchables. People, they were not even ready to consider them as human beings. That was the condition. Even cattle were preferred over human beings, over the untouchables. So don't you think this is a kind of exclusionary tendency, a kind of exclusionary nature of the society? I'm talking especially about the medieval era. See how people have been dealt. See how people have been treated. Clear? And in whichever section of the society it may be, doesn't matter. So again, I'm looking at a dichotomy where the society has been inclusionary on one hand and exclusionary on the other. That too is a unique feature of Indian society, right? Next, the 7th feature. Okay. By the way, let me tell you, along with this discussion, there is also a material available. Take that material, go through that material. All these things which I'm elaborating here, which I'm discussing here, they are there in that material in written format. I would take a bit of time here. After this discussion, I would also be coming out with previous questions. I will be discussing those previous questions. Go through them. Okay. Please try to write your own answer based on the discussion that I am doing. Try to write the answers of all these questions. Clear? I will, if you write the answer, well, you will get the answers of those questions in my discussion only. Based on the discussion and based on the material, try to write the answer. Send those answers to us. I assure you that I'll correct your answer. Okay? And if you have any query at any given particular point, you have 3 particular mechanisms to contact me. Below there is a particular section called comment section. Comment there. If you have any doubt, any query, comment there. I will answer. You can also book an appointment, and through that appointment you can try to contact me. The organization, they will confirm, they'll reserve a slot, and at that particular point of time I'll give you a call. I'll call you. Okay, that's the second mode of communication which I'll be going forward with. And the third mode of communication, on every Sunday 8 p.m. around every Sunday, I will try to keep it at 8 p.m. If any eventuality is there, you'll be intimated earlier only, and we'll reschedule it at 9. It can be at times, it may happen, because along you can easily understand, along with the schedule of my classes, it might become hectic at times. So we may schedule it at 9 as well. On every Sunday, however, we'll be having discussions, a group discussion sort of a thing, where you'll be coming up with your queries. We'll either schedule it on Skype or on Zoom. Okay, and we'll be going for these discussions. And simultaneously, the questions, the previous questions which I'll be discussing along with the topic, please try to write answers of them. Send those answers. Take a snap of it. Don't take a snap of it. Rather use Cam Scanner. Scan it, convert it into PDF, and send it to us. I'll ensure that I go through all these copies, and from my side I'll try to give as detailed feedback as possible. Okay, so this way, see, UPSC is not just about studying. It's more about preparing. Whatever you're studying here, you need to come out with it. Okay, subsequently I'll also be discussing the approach of various questions. In which particular, this is the first class. In the subsequent classes, I'll also be coming up with the approaches, how to approach in which particular question. Say in case of elaboration. In case of illustration and elaboration, are you supposed to write the same thing? In case of analysis and examination, are you supposed to write the same thing? No, you're not. Let's start the writing here, and subsequently in the subsequent videos, I'll be discussing all those aspects. Okay. Right now, let's go forward with the topic. The 7th point that I was talking about. Community-centric life rather than individualism. Okay. That's the aspect. Community-centric life rather than individualism, or individual-centric or self-centric. Again, people in India primarily, I'm looking at not just ancient India, medieval India, even modern India till very recently. People were predominantly bound by the village panchayat, the caste panchayat, the caste rules. Kshatriyas or Rajputs are supposed to behave like that. A Brahmin is supposed to behave like that. We all were bound by these caste rules. It was not the individual, but these rules or society, rules of the society which mattered most. Clear? In fact, it is so pervasive, so broad-based, that let's look at our religious institutions. Whether you talk of a temple, you talk of a mosque, or you talk of a gurudwara, you'll always find, you'll mandatorily find a water body along with that particular religious institution, whether it's temple or a mosque or a gurudwara. And that water would commonly be not touched. Why? That water is being preserved, so that at the time of crisis, say there is a drought or there is a cholera, this particular water body will be opened up for the village. See, even in the name of religion, we have been looking at community way of life. Look at the religious institutions, whether temples, mosques, gurudwaras, doesn't matter. They're always built on a high podium. Why? A high platform. Why? Say in case of flood, people of the village, they would come, they would gather, and they would take refuge on that high platform. This way, they all would be saved. Okay? Similarly, whether you talk of Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, see the way all these religions, they talk about either kar seva or service to the society, service to the people. Now, in Hinduism, I do admit they have a particular tradition or a particular philosophy of afterlife. Okay, next life, what will happen to you? pap, punya and all these things, that you will be carrying forward all these good work. What about Sikhism? Why Islam? Why Christianity? They also, all these religions, they also promote service to the people. Again, I'm looking at, through religion only, community way of life. Clear? All these religions, the way the religious institutions are built, or the way the society runs, time and again I'm seeing this particular aspect, where individual means hardly anything. Rather, it's the community, the group of people. So, community being given primacy over the individuals. Clear? This particular video, it's going on for half an hour. Okay, it's nearly half an hour. I would rather end this video here, and I will be discussing the second or the last part, that is the 8th part, in the next video. One thing, let me make clear here. I would not like to lengthen a video. I would not like to make a video too long. Most of you will be watching in your mobile phones. Some might be watching on laptops or on desktops as well. But continuously watching longer videos online, it becomes really strenuous. So I would prefer to keep the videos short. So I'll be dividing the videos in as many parts as possible. Okay, I'll try to keep the videos whether of half an hour or of 40 or 45 minutes at max, right? I'm ending the video here. The last point, that is unity within diversity, or the notion of pluralism that we look at, that is the 8th point, I'll be discussing in the second part of this video, right? Thank you guys.